Good morning, gardeners, and welcome to Thursday, June 1st. My name is Catherine, and I created a show called Good Morning Gardeners, even though I can't grow green things because I'm speaking of gardening metaphorically. We're planting the seeds for a better day. We are starting our day by getting in the right mindset to cultivate a better life for ourselves, better communities, and a better world. Today is the Global Day of Parents. Designated by the UN General Assembly in 2012, this international observance provides an opportunity to appreciate parents for their selfless commitment to children and their lifelong sacrifice towards nurturing this relationship. Parents and caregivers are the chief architects of early childhood development. Like no one else, they shape the experience that builds their children's brains and sets them on a path towards healthy development. Parenting, whether it is taken on by a mother, father, grandparent, sibling, or another relative, or another adult, is the job of providing nurturing care throughout childhood, preparing children to live in society, form relationships, learn, work, and thrive. In early childhood, parenting offers the opportunity to set a foundation for lifelong success. So, today is June 1st for you. For me, it is May 31st. And so we are transitioning to a new month, and that is what I'm going to speak with you about this morning. Because I don't know about you, but I have built up rituals around transitioning to a new month. And these rituals, they wax and they wane. Sometimes I get really into it. Last year, I used to create a new mood board every single month to inspire myself to achieve, my goals, whatever I was hoping to accomplish that month. The mood boards take a lot of time. So this year, I'm only building one once a quarter. So I didn't have to build one this month. But typically what I do is at the top of every month, for this year, what I've been doing is I cultivate my list of daily and weekly habits that I want to build. And I have this document in my planner. I'll just show it to you if you're watching. That tracks all of these habits. And let's see. And then at the end, I score how I did. I'm not sure if I want to show you what my habits are, but basically I do that and I look at all of my appointments for the month and I think about all the benchmarks I want to hit and stuff like that. I think about, my daily schedule. I think about how it's been and how I want to change it. And I can tell you, I haven't done this yet. I'm going to do this today, but for the month of May, as usual, I was overscheduled. I had put too many things into every single day. So one of my goals for June is to try to be a little bit more creative with my schedule and maybe block off certain days for certain things, maybe even the first half of the month for one type of thing and the second half of the month for another type of thing. Things like that. Instead of, I typically, as a personality trait, I always have a lot of projects going on, I guess. And so trying to fit them all into every single day is just, it's not sustainable and it wears me out. So that is what I am going to be doing as we transition to the month of June. And so when I do this, I think a lot about my goals, what I want to accomplish, because what I do every single day, every single week, every single month, it all adds up to bigger bodies of work, larger goals accomplished. And when I think about my goals, I often think about Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. And if you're not familiar with this book, it attempts to break down the building blocks of success in a very honest way, not necessarily in a way that is pleasant for the reader or it's not meant to necessarily provide advice for the reader. And I found this book upsetting. One of the most upsetting things in the book for me is that Malcolm Gladwell demonstrates how major success is largely dependent on factors that the individual can't control. So basically, even though it is important to work hard, a lot of success at the high level boils down to luck. That's one of the things I took away from the book. And I suppose I think about outliers when I think about my goals, because usually I don't actually focus on the parts of the book that outline which parts of success are outside of my control. But I think about what parts are inside of my control, and I look at some of the case studies that Malcolm Gladwell shares, and I think about, okay, what could this person have done differently, or what was actually in this inside of this person's control, or within this person's control. And I am absolutely haunted by the story of Chris Langan. So I'm going to read his story to you this morning. Chris Langan says in an interview to Malcolm Gladwell, "To this day, I haven't met anybody who was as poor when they were kids as our family was. We didn't have a pair of matched socks. Our shoes had holes in them. Our pants had holes in them. We only had one set of clothes. I remember my brothers and I going into the bathroom and using the bathtub to wash our only set of clothes, and we were bare-ass naked when we were doing this because we didn't have anything to wear." When the boys were in grade school, the family moved to Bozeman, Montana. One of Chris's brothers spent time in a foster home. Another was sent to reform school. "I don't think the school ever understood just how gifted Christopher was," his brother Jeff says. "He sure as hell didn't play it up. This was Bozeman. It wasn't like it is today. It was a small hick town when we were growing up. We weren't treated well there. They just decided that my family was a bunch of deadbeats." To stick up for himself and his brothers, Chris started to lift weights. One day when Chris was 14, his father Jack got rough with the boys, as he sometimes did, and Chris knocked him out cold. Jack left, never to return. Upon graduation from high school, Chris was offered 2 full scholarships, one to Reed College in Oregon and the other to the University of Chicago. He chose Reed. "It was a huge mistake," Chris recalls. "I had a real case of culture shock. I was a crew-cut kid who had been working at a ranch in the summers in Montana, and here I was with a whole bunch of long-haired city kids, most of them from New York. And these kids had a whole different style than I was used to. I couldn't get a word in edgewise in class. They were very inquisitive, asking questions all the time. I was crammed into a dorm room. There were 4 of us, and the other 3 guys had a whole other different lifestyle. They were smoking pot. They would bring their girlfriends into the room. I had never smoked pot before, so basically I took to hiding in the library. Then I lost that scholarship. My mother was supposed to fill out a parent's financial statement for the renewal of that scholarship. She neglected to do so. She was confused by the requirements or whatever. At some point, it came to my attention that my scholarship had not been renewed. So when I went to the office to ask why, and they told me, well, no one sent us the financial statement, and we allocated all that scholarship money and now it's gone, so I'm afraid you don't have a scholarship anymore. That was the style of the place. They simply didn't care. They didn't give a shit about their students. There was no counseling, no mentoring, nothing. Chris left Reed before the final set of exams, leaving him with a row of F's on his transcript. In the first semester, he had earned A's. He went back to Bozeman and worked in construction as a Forest Services firefighter for a year and a half. Then he enrolled at Montana State University. "I was taking math and philosophy classes," he recalled. "And then in the winter quarter, I was living 13 miles out of town, out on Beach Hill Road, and the transmission fell out of my car. My brothers had used it when they were gone that summer. They were working on the railroad and had driven it on the railroad tracks. I didn't have the money to repair it, so I went to my advisor and the dean in sequence, and I said, I have a problem. The transmission fell out of my car, and you have me in a 7:30 a.m. and an 8:30 a.m. class. If you could please just transfer me to the afternoon sections of these classes, I would appreciate it because of this car problem. There was a neighbor who was a rancher who was going to drive me at 11 o'clock. My advisor was this cowboy-looking guy with a handlebar mustache, dressed in a tweed jacket. He said, "Well, son, after looking at your transcript at Reed College, I see that you have yet to learn that everyone has to make sacrifices to get an education. Request denied." So then I went to the dean. Same treatment. His voice grew tight. He was describing things that had happened more than 30 years ago, but the memory still made him angry. At that point I realized, here I was, knocking myself out to make the money to make my way back to school, and it's in the middle of the Montana winter. I am willing to hitchhike into town every day, do whatever I had to do, just to get into school and back, and they are unwilling to do anything for me. So bananas. And that was the point I decided I could do without the higher education system. Even if I couldn't do without it, it was sufficiently repugnant to me that I wouldn't do it anymore. So I dropped out of college. Simple as that. Chris Langan's experiences at Reed and Montana State represented a turning point in his life. As a child, he had dreamt of becoming an academic. He should have gotten a PhD. Universities are institutions structured in large part for people with his kind of deep intellectual interests and curiosity. Once he got into the university environment, I thought he would prosper. I really did, his brother Mark says. I thought he would somehow find a niche. It made absolutely no sense to me when he left that. Without a degree, Langan floundered. He worked in construction. One frigid winter, he worked on a clam boat in Long Island. He took factory jobs and minor civil service positions and eventually became a bouncer in a bar on Long Island, which was his principal occupation for much of his adult years. Through it all, he continued to read deeply in philosophy, mathematics, and physics as he worked on a sprawling treatise he calls the CTMU, the Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe. But without academic credentials, he despairs of ever getting published in a scholarly journal. "I am a guy who has a year and a half of college," he says with a shrug. "At some point, this will come to the attention of the editor, and he is going to take the paper and send it off to the referees, and these referees are going to try and look me up, and they are not going to find me. And they are going to say, this guy has a year and a half of college. How can he know what he is talking about?" It's a heartbreaking story. At one point, I asked Langan, hypothetically, whether he would take a job at Harvard University were it offered to him. "Well, that's a difficult question," he replied. "Obviously, as a full professor at Harvard, I would count. My ideas would have weight, and I could use my position, my affiliation at Harvard, to promote my ideas. An institution like that is a great source of intellectual energy, and if I were at a place like that, I could absorb the vibration in the air." It was suddenly clear how lonely his life had been. Here he was, a man with an insatiable appetite for learning, forced for the most of his adult life to live in intellectual isolation. "I even noticed that kind of intellectual energy in the year and a half I was in college," he said, almost wistfully. "Ideas are in the air constantly. It's such a stimulating place to be. On the other hand," he went on, "Harvard is basically a glorified corporation, operating with a profit incentive. That's what makes it tick. It has an endowment in the billions of dollars. The people running it are not necessarily searching for truth and knowledge. They want to be big shots, and when you accept a paycheck from these people, it's going to come down to what you want to do and what you feel is right, versus what the man says you can do and receive another paycheck. When you're there, they got a thumb right on you. They're there to make sure you don't step out of line." What does the story of Chris Langan tell us? His explanations, as heartbreaking as they are also a little strange. His mother forgets to sign his financial aid form, and, just like that, no scholarship. He tries to move from a morning to an afternoon class, something students do every day, and gets stopped cold. And why were Langan's teachers at Reed in Montana so indifferent to his plight? Teachers typically delight in minds as brilliant as his. Langan talks about dealing with Reed and Montana State as if they were some kind of vast, unyielding government bureaucracy. But colleges, particularly small liberal arts colleges like Reed, tend not to be rigid bureaucracies. Making allowances in the name of helping someone stay in school is what professors do all the time. Even in his discussion of Harvard, it's as if Langan has no conception of the culture and particulars of the institution he's talking about. When you accept a paycheck from these people, it is going to come down to what you want to do and what you feel is right versus what the man says you can do to receive another paycheck. What? One of the main reasons college professors accept a lower paycheck than they could get in private industry is that university life gives them the freedom to do what they want to do and what they feel is right. Langan has Harvard backwards. When I reread this story this morning, I got chills. The way Malcolm Gladwell tells this story, Chris Langan amounts to nothing in life because he failed to successfully navigate the higher education system because he misunderstood the culture. This is absolutely terrifying to me because I also grew up poor, maybe not that poor, and I often struggle to understand culture and discern people's motivations. I was also what people called a gifted child, and although I did graduate from college, I have continually struggled to fit in anywhere culturally. So Chris Langan's story is like my horror story. And what is the purpose of horror stories, if not to learn from the mistakes of others? I think reading this story is one of the reasons I've developed a habit of constantly checking my perspective, constantly trying to see the world from a different angle. I don't want to get trapped in any kind of tunnel vision like it seems Chris Langan became trapped in. So for our feel-good moment today, I want to offer you a different sort of perspective. I want you to think about your life as a work of art and you yourself as the artist. I am going to read to you from a book, which I have on Kindle. It's called Art and Fear: Observations on the Perils and Rewards of Art Making by David Bayles and Ted Orland. This book was written by and for artists trying to find their way in the art world, but I think this book contains plenty of general lessons that can be applied to all kinds of people, including non-artists. I am going to read to you about imagination in the context of creating a single work of art, and I want you to think about what you can imagine for your life and the actual day-to-day process of creating that reality that you imagine for yourself. Imagination is in control when you begin making an object. The artwork's potential is never higher than in that magic moment when the first brushstroke is applied, the first chord struck. But as the piece grows, technique and craft take over, and imagination becomes a less useful tool. A piece grows by becoming specific. The moment Herman Melville penned the opening line, "Call me Ishmael," one actual story, Moby Dick, began to separate itself from a multitude of imaginable others. And so on through the following 500-odd pages, each successive sentence in some way had to acknowledge and relate to all that preceded. Joan Didion nailed this issue squarely and with trademark pessimism when she said, "What's so hard about that first sentence is that you're stuck with it. Everything else is going to flow out of that sentence. And by the time you've laid down the first two sentences, your options are all gone." It's the same for all media. The first few brushstrokes to the blank canvas satisfy the requirements of many possible paintings, while the last few fit only that painting. They could go nowhere else. The development of an imagined piece into an actual piece is a progression of decreasing possibilities, as each step in execution reduces future options by converting one, and only one, possibility into a reality. Finally, at some point or another, the piece could not be other than it is, and it is done. That moment of completion is also, inevitably, a moment of loss, the loss of all the other forms of the imagined piece might have taken. The irony here is that the piece you make is always one step removed from what you imagined, or what else you can imagine, or what you're right on the edge of being able to imagine. Designer Charles Eames, arguably the quintessential Renaissance man of the 20th century, used to complain good-naturedly that he devoted only about 1% of his energy to conceiving a design, and the remaining 99% to holding on to it as a project ran its course. Small surprise. After all, your imagination is free to race 100 works ahead, conceiving pieces you could and perhaps should and maybe one day will execute, but not today, not in the piece at hand. And you can work on today. All you can work on today is directly in front of you. Your job is to develop an imagination of the possible. A finished piece is, in effect, a test of correspondence between imagination and execution. And perhaps surprisingly, the more common obstacle to achieving that correspondence is not undisciplined execution, but undisciplined imagination. It's altogether too seductive to approach your proposed work believing your materials to be more malleable than they really are, your ideas to be more compelling, your execution more refined. As Stanley Kunitz once commented, the poem in the head is always perfect. Resistance begins when you try to convert it into language. And it's true, most artists don't daydream about making great art. They daydream about having made great art. What artist has not experienced the feverish euphoria of composing the perfect thumbnail sketch, first draft, negative, or melody, only to run headlong into a stone wall, trying to convert that tantalizing hint into the finished mural, novel, photograph, sonata? The artist's life is frustrating, not because the passage is slow, but because he imagines it to be fast. So this morning, when I woke up, I began imagining everything I wanted to do with my day. I thought of paintings I want to make, videos I want to create, blog posts I want to write. I thought about foods I want to cook, rooms I want to clean, and trips I want to plan. It was an amazing moment. But then I sat down and I wrote down a handful of these things in my planner, scheduling roughly how long each of them would take, and I quickly ran out of time. Because what I can imagine I want to do is so much bigger than the time I actually have to do these things. And as counterintuitive as it seems, this is why it's so important to spend more time than you think you need to setting your intentions and making your plans. It's important to plan your life carefully, taking care to make time for the things that you care most about. Because if you don't, the things you don't care so much about can easily eat up your time. It's important to check in with yourself regularly and make sure that you are on the right track. Because if you're not, you need to get off that track and onto a different track as soon as possible. So for our focus moment today, I want you to think about the time you spend planning your time. Do you feel like you spend enough time on this? I am a big planner, but I still believe that I could benefit from spending more time thinking deeply about what I really want to do and making my plans. So I would definitely encourage you to set aside more time to think about what you really want to do, how long it will take, and when you are going to do it. I hope you found this helpful, and I will speak with you again tomorrow.